Mrs. Allen made sure, like every female I've ever known in the history of the world as well, she made sure that she got some new dresses out of this excursion. I feel like we find reasons to get new dresses and outfits. That has not changed. Hello everyone, welcome to Epics and Earrings. Here we discover and we celebrate great stories, beautiful books, and character-inspired style statements. I'm your host, Jess. I am here with some fun earrings. Aren't they fun? That's all I say. Aren't they fun? I go back and I'm like, Jessica, can you think of some other words besides fun? But they are fun and they're very pretty. I don't think I wear these very often because they're a little bit smaller than I like my earrings to be. But what I loved about them is they have this little etching around the outside of them, and it catches the light really, really well. The reason I picked these is because we are in the Regency era right now. I would think during the day, instead of wearing their fancy jewels, they might wear something, excuse me, more like these. They're classy. They're dainty, they catch the eye. They remind me of fishing lures, only they're on your ears. So who are they luring? Let's discuss Chapter 2. This is Volume 1, Chapter 2, Northanger Abbey. In addition to what has been already said of Catherine Morland's personal and mental endowments, when about to be launched into all the difficulties and dangers of a 6 weeks residence in Bath, it may be stated for the reader's more certain information, lest the following pages should otherwise fail of giving any idea of what her character is meant to be, that her heart was affectionate, her disposition cheerful and open, without conceit or affectation of any kind, her manners just removed from the awkwardness and shyness of a girl, her person pleasing, and when in good looks pretty, and her mind about as ignorant and uninformed as the female mind at 17 usually is. Catherine lacked experience, but she wasn't an unkind person. She was actually a very sweet person. She was cheerful. She was not super proud, or she didn't put on airs. She sounds like a really nice girl. She is, however, uninformed. She hasn't been out in the world. When the hour of departure drew near, the maternal anxiety of Mrs. Morland will be naturally supposed to be most severe. Catherine is leaving her parents for the first time in her life, and she's going to be with Mr. and Mrs. Allen in Bath. Anyway, we'll talk more about Bath later. I don't think Mr. and Mrs. Morland are particularly worrisome or worried parents. They are very practical and maybe a little naive, but they trust Mr. and Mrs. Allen, and they seem to trust Catherine. The biggest thing her mom says to her is, "I beg, Catherine, you will always wrap yourself up very warm about the throat when you come home from the rooms at night. And I wish you would try to keep some account of the money you spend. I will give you this little book on purpose." Now, her father gave her, I think 10 guineas, only 10 guineas, and promised her more when she wanted it. And I feel like Catherine, like every teenager ever in the whole existence of the world, was like, really, 10 guineas? Really? Seriously, Dad? So, not a whole lot of money to actually keep track of. Under these unpromising auspices, the parting took place and the journey began. It was performed with suitable quietness and uneventful safety. Neither robbers nor tempest befriended them, nor one lucky overturn to introduce them to the hero. So, again, comparing to the Gothic novels, nothing really exciting happens for Catherine. Poor Catherine. So boring. They arrive in Bath, and she is all eager delight. Her eyes are here, there, and everywhere. She is really excited to be in a new place. Do you remember the first time you went to an exotic or new place? I mean, it could be exotic is very relative. It's a very relative term. But how did you feel when you think back on that moment of stepping into a new place that you'd never been? And that feeling of freedom. Oh, it's exhilarating. I used to love airports when I finally did any flying, because I didn't fly when I was a little girl. And I loved airports because it just had this sense of being in an airport. It felt so big, like the whole world was at your fingertips. And I realized as an adult, airports are not your favorite place to be. But I just remember feeling this sense of adventure in an airport. And I still do, because I'm not in airports all the time for work or anything. It has not been completely ruined for me in that way, but it does give you this great grand sense of adventure. Now, so Jane gives us a description of Mrs. Allen here. Mrs. Allen was one of that numerous class of females whose society can raise no other emotion than surprise at there being any men in the world who could like them well enough to marry them. I hope nobody's ever said that about me. Oh my gosh. She had neither beauty, genius, accomplishment, nor manner. The air of a gentlewoman, a great deal of quiet, inactive good temper, and a trifling turn of mind were all that could account for her being the choice of a sensible, intelligent man like Mr. Allen. She had a harmless delight in being fine. She liked clothes. Mrs. Allen made sure, like every female I've ever known in the history of the world as well, she made sure that she got some new dresses out of this excursion. I feel like we find reasons to get new dresses and outfits. That has not changed. And she is really into her clothing, Mrs. Allen. Jane was in her 20s when she wrote this. She was a very thoughtful woman, very insightful, but I think it's still really hard to put yourself in the mindset of someone who is 20 years older than you. I mean, Jane doesn't know what it's like to be a 40-year-old married woman. As much as we can guess what somebody's experience is, we really don't know. And I think Jane was very perceptive, but I think some of her older female characters, I don't know, I don't think they're as developed or as exciting. They seem a little bit more one-dimensional, particularly in this book. I'm not saying in other books because it's been a while since I've read some of her other ones. But I think that's also indicative of maybe how Jane saw women who were older and who were married. Maybe she saw their focus becoming clothes or marrying their daughters off or whatever it was that society was demanding that they kind of spend their time and focus on. Not necessarily, they didn't necessarily have all these options. So Mrs. Allen, who didn't have any children of her own that it mentions in the book, she was focused on her looks. Catherine also bought some new clothes as well. So I imagine a montage here of them like trying on new clothes and giggling together, like to some 80s music, but I don't think that's what happened. So Catherine looked okay, and they decided to go to this ballroom. It doesn't say they were invited to a ball, so I'm assuming that this was sort of an open event and people in a particular class of society were eligible to be there, so they showed up. With more care for the safety of her new gown than for the comfort of her protege, Mrs. Allen made her way through the throng of men by the door as swiftly as the necessary caution would allow. Catherine, however, kept close at her side and linked her arm too firmly within her friend's to be torn asunder by any common effort of a struggling assembly. They're looking for someone that they know. Catherine is a young girl. This is one of her first little events that she's going to, and it probably feels pretty overwhelming. So she's holding on to Mrs. Allen, and Mrs. Allen is very concerned about her dress as she's moving through the throng of people. They don't really find a comfortable seat. They're squished and pressed, and there's a lot happening. Somebody did mention to me who had been to Bath. She said what she noticed was that the rooms were very small. The settings were very small. And so if they're having a ball, you think of a big ballroom, but I don't think that's what this was. I think this was a lot of people in a decent sized but small room for today's standards. And I think it's funny that that Jane describes that they saw nothing of the dancers but the high feathers of some of the ladies, kind of wafting through the air, because you can't even see who they're attached to. You just see the feathers dancing. I loved the dances back then. I think they were really interesting and fun, although it was probably hot. And it was probably like stuffy and, as Jane is describing, pretty claustrophobic. I think it's very funny that Jane uses words like imprisonment, fellow captives, awkwardness, and the imprisonment and fellow captives in particular feel very funny to me. Catherine says how uncomfortable it is not to have a single acquaintance here. I underlined that because I can remember different situations where I might have had one single acquaintance, but didn't really know anybody. And I don't find it as terrifying as some people do. I'm a little more extroverted, but in this situation, they really needed some acquaintances. Now, Mrs. Allen keeps saying that over and over again. Oh, I just wish we had an acquaintance. I wish we had an acquaintance. And it really starts to get on Catherine's nerves. She's like, okay, you saying it is not making it any better. Shut it. Shutty. Mr. Allen disappeared the second he walked into this place, so he wasn't of any help at all. I don't know where he went, but he left. Maybe he's going to smoke a cigar somewhere. I don't know. And he comes back and he's like, I hope you had a very agreeable ball. And Catherine's like, oh, it's very agreeable indeed. She hides a great yawn. And Mrs. Allen is like, I wish she had been able to dance. I wish. And, Catherine's polite, but disappointed. She's disappointed. Why not? Why shouldn't Catherine be disappointed? It was her first ball, and it was a real snoozer. When next we meet, we are going to read chapter 3, and we're going to review it and have a great time talking about what happens for Catherine in that chapter. Hopefully something a little juicier than this chapter, so we shall see. That's it for this episode of Epics and Earrings. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please like, share, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. And follow us on all the channels, all the places. All right, this is going to be epic. Mwah. Bye for now.